Hi, I'm Paul.
And I'm Tiffany.
To some, we could be called career wizards.
And to others, sometimes we seem like therapists. However, we definitely are not.
But for you, we are the co hosts of the Career Boosters podcast.
It was such a moment of connection during a virtual interview because I think it can often feel a little more disconnected than being in person, a little more removed, a little more impersonal, I think. And so to me, it just said so much about who that candidate was as a person, their character, their ability to kind of reflect on their own experience and pay it forward. And that just always stayed with me, that particular story. So that was one I thought I would share.
Hello, and welcome to the Career Boosters podcast, season 2, episode 23. I was trying to find a funny Michael Jordan joke, but then I'm like, yeah, it is not going to work. So Michael Jordan was number 23. Anyways, so I'm not going to give any sort of joke. This week, we have the very exciting topic of interviews. No, not interviews for podcasts, which we are doing right now, or anything like that, but more of the job-related interviews. We're going to talk about today. So the old tell me about yourself to start off an interview, going into strengths and weaknesses, the behavioral based questions like tell me about yourself, give me an example of all part of the interview process. Today we get to interview and talk to Amber Nicolson, who just happens to be our boss. Crazy, crazy. And one of the only people, as far as I know, that's ever interviewed the two of us in an interest. So that's crazy. And I've had a chance to interview Tiffany with Amber. So what a day. What a day. As we journey into 2025, the world of interviews seems to be kind of the same and kind of different. Tools like video interviewing tools, where they're a part of kind of pre-screening processes or even just video interviews, AI tools helping organizations pick and select candidates, cases delivered virtually, presentations delivered virtually. All of this is part of our new normal when it comes to interviews. One thing I have been hearing around the world of interviews revolves around people's skill sets and how to interview. And I don't know how organizations are really helping other managers like learn how to interview people. And so hopefully we can glean a little insights into how to do a great interview, what are some great questions, all of those kinds of things. And to be a great interviewer, it takes time. Takes just like anything else, takes time. So Amber, we get to jump right into the first question. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you can tell us a little bit about how you've come to be in the position you are in now, the
Mhm.
manager of careers and work integrated learning, and how you support MBA students.
Absolutely. So first of all, thanks so much to you, Paul, and to you, Tiffany, for having me on. Very exciting. I'm immensely, thrilled for both of you that you're in season 2, episode 23 of this amazing podcast. So I think it's such a great service for MBA students. So wanted to thank you both for having me on. So as you mentioned, my role is managing an amazing and talented team, of course, present company included, of career development professionals that support both our BCom and MBA students. For our MBA students in particular, we offer some areas of work integrated learning support. So that would be support with things like our MBA internships and capstone projects, experiential learning, so sort of events and programming that help connect employers and alumni, both locally in Calgary and Toronto and other centers. And then, of course, I think a really unique feature of the U of A's MBA program is the amazing career education support that's provided both through the curriculum, so through the courses that you both instruct, as well as through the career coaching that's provided to students. So kind of in a nutshell, that's what our office does to support MBA students. In terms of my role in particular, I've worked in career development roles and sort of with students for many years here at the University of Alberta. So I started my career working for the Central Career Center, worked in employer relations, event and programming support, moved over to the Faculty of Arts where I developed and managed their sort of co-op program, which is called Arts Work Experience. Worked briefly in the registrar's office and came over to the School of Business about 3 years ago now. And also just wanted to throw in that until I guess about the end of August, I was also working on a part-time Master's of Counseling program So definitely felt a lot of empathy for graduate students, I think, over this last couple of years as I've been working through that process.
You just talked, I think, about a whole bunch of positions or a career journey for sure that has to have included a lot of hiring. Hiring of
Yes.
professionals, hiring of students, prepping students. And so, I mean, that's also why we asked you here, not just because you're our boss and we enjoy you, but that you've got lots of experience in the realm of the topic that we're talking about today. So let's start off with just how much hiring have you done? When, where, what kind of positions? What's your experience in this realm of interviewing?
Yeah, so I've had the privilege of interviewing lots of folks for lots of different types of roles, from full-time kind of continuing positions that were more junior level to more kind of mid-career level roles. I've been parts of hiring panels for kind of more senior roles where there's committee hiring too, which can happen sometimes. Certainly for student staff roles, and then as well as coaching students to prepare for interviews for many years, particularly when I worked in the Faculty of Arts and coaching co-op students.
So many pieces of interviewing, I'm sure, as you've managed through your career, have been the same and some are changing, right? As you've continued to kind of manage through the process of, hiring for senior people within the university or even students or helping students, right? So,
Mhm.
and so when we think of these more like kind of standard interview questions, what for you are some of the standard interview questions that you like to ask, and what makes someone kind of stand out when answering those? So those are things like, tell me about yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, or if there's any other additions that you have to that.
Yeah, I think absolutely the questions you mentioned. I actually looked back through some old interview question sheets that we've used over the years and more, especially in more recent times. And really those kind of tried and true ones, tell me about yourself, looking to extract sort of a combination of educational and training experience as well as work experience, a view of career and kind of how that position fits into someone's career plan, I think is a really helpful part of the answer to that question as well. Strengths that would help you succeed in the role, as well as an area for improvement. I personally tend to steer away from labeling those weaknesses because I think everyone has growth edges, right? And areas where they want to improve. So kind of what are some of the things that maybe you're wanting to improve? And then I think a big part of that question is what are you doing to actively improve those skills, right? So it shows you have that self-reflection and then also that you're being really proactive in developing the skills that you want to develop. I think for a lot of positions on campus that I've interviewed for, a lot of those scenarios, sort of behavioral questions are quite common as well. I suspect that might vary a little bit depending on the nature of a position someone's applying for, but that can just provide some really good insights into how folks would approach a particular situation. So those would be some of I would say, really common ones that I saw sort of carrying through the various positions that I've interviewed for in recent times.
And I think that aligns with certainly what Paul and I teach. The standard things that you're likely to always hear in every interview is, and you just named those. But I want to highlight that you just talked about the tell me about yourself question, and that what stands out to you is when they're able to talk about themselves but connect the dots between their experience and this role. Some people just figure that's a time to simply talk about themselves, and they forget that you still need to tell the version of your story, the parts of your story that connect to the role that you're applying for, or the skill sets or the experience. And that if you don't, it's a bit of a missed opportunity to truly make those connections, and that can help you stand out. Another one is don't just walk through your resume. We've all read the resume, right? So tell us something a bit different, or color and context for sure. I am always curious to hear what people ask that isn't necessarily standard. Many of us, especially who've been hiring for a while, have that kind of go-to question that is a good question, but might kind of catch somebody off guard. Do you have any of those?
I don't know if this question would catch people off guard necessarily, but I think a question that's always really important for me to get kind of a sight line on is how what someone thinks are characteristics of a good team, and then how would they contribute to a positive team culture. I know over the last few years, as we've been kind of reorganizing the Seawell office and had a bunch of staff who'd been around for a number of years and a bunch of new staff kind of coming together. That kind of team culture piece, I think, was really important just to kind of see how all the pieces would fit together. So I think that's one that's really important to me when building a team myself.
Mhm.
I also like to ask a question about when a time someone showed some initiative
Mhm.
that was maybe a little outside of the box for their particular role. So did they suggest a process improvement? Something that, again, is a little bit, to your point, we kind of can get a sense from a resume, some of the key duties and responsibilities folks had in a job, but what did they do to really um, kind of inject some life and personality
Mhm.
into the role and yeah,
Mhm.
takes, step outside of their comfort zone and take some of that initiative. That's one that I like to ask about.
Those are so good. I think, the thing I really appreciate about that is I love things about culture and team. I I have said this for probably my whole life, my whole career in career management. I could teach you anything I want from a technical perspective. I could teach you advanced Word or Python or Tableau or Power BI. What I cannot teach you is the contributions that you are going to make to a team and what you can add to a team. And think about the stuff Tiffany and I teach. It's around emotional intelligence. It's around communication. It's around all of the things that are the differentiators for people, right? I love the question around team. I'm going to come to Tiffany in a second. I'm going to share mine. I think this is really interesting about around like some of our own kind of questions that might not be standard. So, Tiffany, I'll share mine and then I'll go to you quickly and then I'll ask Amber the next question. But mine, I love to ask. There are two really easy ones. If you had the whole day free to yourself, what would you do? I love to do that early on to make somebody feel really at ease and try and get like the best out of them through the interview. And then I love asking about their most significant achievement. That's something that I really love.
I like to focus, and it changes around, but something around the typical conflict question, but not necessarily tell me about a time when you have had conflict. That's a little bit more standard. I tend to ask around, tell me about someone that you've worked with where you just didn't communicate the same language. Like to see if
It's good.
people can truly recognize when that's happened and what they've done, because it happens everywhere. Everybody's afraid of that question, right?
Yeah.
I've never had yes, you have. You just don't
Yeah.
want to talk about it or you don't realize that you have, and both of those aren't great in my
Yeah.
opinion. So something around that to see if there's just recognition of it and then strategies.
That's awesome too. So Amber, we talk, we last week we talked about storytelling, and I think this is something that Tiffany and I just talk about all year long, all time long. I teach classes on this, all of this. So storytelling is a big part of interviews. Is there a story that you have heard a candidate tell that really stood out to you?
Yeah, and in thinking about this question, I agree with both of you. I think stories can really stick for interviewers and can make you stand out as a candidate, particularly when you're doing multiple interviews where folks might have similar types of experience coming in. A really well-told story can kind of be a bit of an edge in an interview. So I think candidates reflecting on a couple of things that might highlight some of the key skills that they want to touch on can be really powerful in an interview. Um, I was thinking about virtual interviewing because I think that's something that's a reality for so many positions now. That's feeling like it's not that new anymore, but is still new-ish to kind of adapt to. And this particular story was from about, I would say, about 3 years ago. So kind of just coming out of COVID times. And it was with a candidate who relayed a story of organizing a volunteer event that was part of a mental health focused student group that they were working with. And so they came up with an idea and a small group sort of executed it. to target a first year residents for the event. So of course, these are students who are often living away from home for the first time, who may be feeling a little isolated and uncertain, that transition time for them. And so what were ways they could kind of ease that transition during that process? And this particular person had lived that transition themselves, so had been in that first year transition experience, or in that position themselves. So what they decided to do, the group actually grew some plants, and then they set out a table and the residents could pick a plant. And the idea was it was something to take away that they could take care of in their apartment, in their residence, and help grow while they were away from family, and just that little point of connection. And the event had occurred several months before the interview, and the candidates sort of leaned off screen. And I don't have a plant right beside me, so I can't quite do this justice. But I have a little bear here, so I'll hold this up instead. And they said, because this is the plant that I received when I was in my first year, and I just know how much that meant to me. And so it was something that I kind of really wanted to pay forward, and my group agreed with me. And so that's what we decided to do. And so it was such a moment of connection during a virtual interview, because I think it can often feel a little more disconnected than being in person, a little more removed, a little more impersonal, I think. And so to me, it just said so much about who that candidate was as a person, their character, their ability to kind of reflect on their own experience and pay it forward. And that just always stayed with me, that particular story. So that was one I thought I would share.
And I just got goosebumps. Like if you're really listening to that and kind of leaning into the story, the moment you kind of even did that, which is this little bear, I had a physiological response. And it's those things, the way our brain hears story, how it involves our whole body. You will remember that interview and that story and that candidate for like ever, probably now. And how many people have we all interviewed? Only a few stand out. So what a brilliant way to demonstrate story and the impact of story. Now, you just said something interesting about it demonstrating their character. And while we judge people on story and we judge people on the words that they say and the resume that they give us, what we also really judge on is a lot of unsaid things, how people show up, brand, our first judgments of them before they even sit down and open their mouth or we open our mouth. Judgments are happening. So tell us a little bit about that as an interviewer and maybe who's done that really well. What are they doing if you're getting a really good read or feel of them?
Yeah, I think it can be a tough thing because an interview is a relatively short exchange. I'm actually doing a social psychology course right now, and of course, we know we form first impressions very, very quickly. So that's a fact of who we are as humans. I think you show up as your authentic self, is my personal view. That's what you can do, right? And so that's kind of what you can control. I think as an interviewer, we also have a responsibility to be aware of our implicit bias that we bring into that situation. And I think that's really important when it comes to interviewing. Um, and I think there's ways, Paul kind of spoke about this a little bit earlier, ways that he likes to break the ice in an interview. I think there's ways candidates can show a little bit of personality as well. So I mean, we're in Edmonton. Weather is always a fair topic of conversation, but just something to kind of show a little bit of personality, I think when you come into the interview space can be really helpful.
Hmm.
Being self-aware, being aware of your body language, the energy you're bringing into the space. And part of that self-awareness, I think, is really developed through practice. Sometimes that might be taping yourself, watching yourself back,
Yeah.
uh, working with a career coach to get some
Mm.
feedback, or with a trusted mentor or friend. So
Mhm.
really getting some of that practice in ahead of time, I think, can kind of help you really show up in an
Okay.
interview. But at the end of the day, I think you want to worry less about trying to fit the mold for an interview
Mhm.
and really bringing your authentic self. Because at the end of the day, that might not be a good fit for you if you can't be yourself in the interview, right?
Yeah. Amber, you made a bunch of just amazing, statements there, and I cannot agree more. Being authentic is so important, and that's literally what Tiffany and I talk about from orientation. It is like, what is and who are you, and lean into that. The thing I wanted to touch base on, like you and I have interviewed quite a bit together, and we have two different styles to the way that we interview, right? You're sitting there and you're writing all the time you're writing, and I'm sitting there staring at the person, not even like writing anything. And so
I can
it's
confirm this. I have sat there not knowing either of you and watched how you showed up. Mhm.
well, and we have our own authentic selves and we show up in those ways, right? Like Amber is very detailed, very kind, very like poignant. And I just sit there and I'm like, just entertain me. I'm like, like talk to me. And like I need to have a connection with somebody. That is so important to be in an interview. And so knowing that there are going to be two different people, right? And that you are potentially interviewing with, I think that's really important.
Before you move on, Paul, I just want to
Yeah.
poke at there's a bit of an assumption when we talk about our authentic self, because I'm with you, Amber. I agree. Where I think we get tripped up is that people who hold on to this is just me. This is my authentic
Mm,
self. There's some really good research around our body language and the way we show up are truly behaviors, and behaviors are learned. And so this simple thing of smiling,
Hmm.
while that may not seem like how you authentically show up, and no, we don't want you to be the Cheshire cat if that's not your thing with the giant teeth grin. There are behaviors that can be learned that have impact on others. And so to make sure that you're not getting caught in the this is just me, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
There's probably a little bit of work there that we could do on
Yeah.
authentic self.
For sure.
yeah.
I'm gonna, I mean, this could be like a 2-hour episode, I think,
Man, we
between the
really
three
could.
of us. So I'm going to add two questions kind of together, Amber, and just maybe some
Okay.
short responses here. So what quickly dismisses somebody in an interview for you? That's the first one. Is there something that's like a bit of a red flag for you? And then after the interview, what extra do candidates do to kind of stand out for you?
hmm so, I mean, an obvious one, I guess, inappropriate behavior or dress would, of course, be one. I think for me, where it's a panel interview, so if it's a discussion with you and I, Paul, I would like to see, especially if we're in a room together, it's harder to tell online, to be perfectly fair, but in an in-person interview, I like to see the candidate make eye contact with all of the interviewers and not just talk to the boss. I think it can carry an unintended consequence of sort of communicating that maybe you don't care as much about the perspective of others in the room. So kind of to Tiffany's point, I agree. Although you bring your authentic self, there is a way to comport yourself. Is that a word? I don't know if I just made up a word. Comport yourself during an interview that I think is really important. It's your professional self, right? Lack of preparation, so failing to research the company, to me just says you're not really interested in the role. So that's a definite one. An absence of thoughtful questions at the end of an interview. To me, you show your interest or reinforce your interest in the position by asking thoughtful questions. And I think sometimes candidates can kind of fall into the trap of thinking, maybe, I don't know if this is true, but I kind of get the sense that some candidates might feel like I'm communicating, you were so thorough and answered all my questions. If you gave a preamble to the interview or what have you, that I don't have any follow-up questions. There's nothing else I need to ask. But really, I think it sort of has the, again, unintended consequence of communicating a lack of interest. And then finally, I'll just end with this one, which is vagueness. And by that, I mean, in particular, if you're talking about a project that involved a team, what was your role in that project, in developing that program, whatever that was? Because sometimes as an interviewer, you can be left with the impression that someone just observed, let's say, an event being planned, but didn't actually have an active role in it. So those are kind of on different ends of a continuum, I guess, but those are some of the things that I think are important. Was there another? Oh, and then you also asked to stand out.
Yeah,
Was
like
that the other
extra
piece?
things maybe like after the interview or anything like that. Post interview, does anything stand out to you?
So good questions at the end of an interview. That's something that I think is really important. Thank you notes, I think, are thoughtful. to me, I think people probably have varied perspectives. Paul and Tiffany might have varied perspectives. To me, they're not a make or break it to me, but I think it's a thoughtful thing to do. I think the big thing with a follow-up note is it has to somehow connect to something that happened in the interview. It shouldn't just be a generic note that you generated a message through ChatGPT and send the same thing to everyone. I think it really has to connect, and that shows genuineness and authenticity. I think, and the other thing I just wanted to mention too, I know you guys in your classes do a lot of reflection on strengths and values. So I think if there's a way to sort of connect that a little bit into your interview questions, if this is an organization that really resonates with your values and strengths, talk about that. Like, I think that would be a really impressive thing for the interviewer to hear.
I would 100% agree. And yes, and talk about it more than that sentence that you just said. Your
Mm,
values strongly align with mine is a
yeah.
sentence we hear all the time in cover letters, and that's where it stops. So please, in an interview, give more than that as well. Do you actually know how they align? How do they? Please be specific. Would be the yes and to that. We mentioned a little bit earlier, you are in a unique position. You have interviewed both of us. And yes, both of you have interviewed me. So that was fun. Um, Tell us a little bit about your experience, anything that you'd like to share about interviewing us, like kind of the peek behind the curtain. We're sometimes on the other side of the table too.
Well, it was a great privilege to interview you both. I think good decisions were made, excellent decisions were made. So I think uh, some of the things, sort of reflecting back, that stood out, I think, for both of you is your empathy, but also your enthusiasm. I think you're both very high energy folk who demonstrate a lot of enthusiasm for this career that you find yourselves in. And that's something that always stands out to me. At the end of the day, as an interviewer, you want to give the job to someone who wants the job and really feels invested in the job. So that's something that definitely stood out. Um, I think that the other thing, just thinking about that team component that I spoke to earlier, because of course, Paul was in the role before Tiffany was brought on. And there was a lot of discussion too, and a lot of thoughtfulness around, I think, how well you complement each other as a team. I don't know, maybe you both have reflections on that. I'm not sure, but I think that was something that kind of stood out to me as well in the interviews. And apologies, my memory is also not the best. So I don't know if I'm going to come up with super specific examples.
And yeah, not necessary. I think it's just funny that it's the one person that can probably interview these two people who have interviewed thousands of people themselves,
Yeah.
right? It's I had a student the other day, it's like, how many people have you interviewed? I'm like, I don't know, 20,000. I can't tell you a number. So
Yeah.
it's such a unique perspective, but Tiffany had something to share.
Yeah, I just want to point out and offer a peek behind my curtain. When I interviewed with both of you, I mean, this was a career pivot. So I was having to work pretty hard to connect a career to this role. I had not had a role like this before. So I've been through that experience. But I also totally botched a question. And it'll
Mhm.
actually stick with me. Not in a, it's just it's a reminder that even people who know how to interview, who teach people how to interview, can still
Mhm.
mess it up in the moment. And I did. And it's okay. Look, I still have the job.
Mhm.
But I also kind of called it out in the moment. And when you talked about the connecting to something in a thank you email, I did. I actually kind of called that out and kind of poked a little fun at, I know I'm supposed to be someone who would be helping students with interviews. I learned a lot from this one, right?
Mhm.
And so can you not have to be perfect and be okay with
Yeah.
it is the learning that I walked away with.
I think, when I think about educating students around job interviews, go in there and just do the best you can. If you've
Yeah.
prepared, if you have tried to know and understand yourself in a great way, you are as ready as you're going to be. And if it's meant to
Mhm.
happen, it will happen. And if it's not, that's okay. You can learn from it, right? And kind of
Mhm.
go from there. So, I think it's only fair though, Amber, since you got to interview the both of us, we should do like a mock interview one
Ha!
day with you,
Oh,
and we
great.
can interview. That could be
Excellent.
fun. What
Excellent.
students get
Sure.
very
Sounds fun.
scared about having to interview with us. I don't know why, but they're very intimidated. But I think we could have fun
By
with them.
you.
Yeah, yeah, by me. Yeah, by me.
Well, you just
Uh,
said you interviewed 20,000 people or
yeah,
more,
I
Paul.
know.
So you're
Intimidating.
Maybe I shouldn't say that then, I guess. So yes, yeah. The last question I have before Tiffany's kind of lightning round. What recommendations do you have for those preparing for interviews?
Mhm. I think, well, you definitely touched on this. Preparation is key. I think part of preparation is understanding the format of the interview. So knowing, of course, is it going to be virtual or in person? Is it going to be a panel interview? There might be some other tips and tricks for telephone interviews, for example, where you don't have any face-to-face communication, which is a whole nother ballgame, or we're not going to have time for, I think, today. Um, of course, know where you're going. Maybe pick out your clothes the night before, leave on time, maybe even do a dry run, right? So you know exactly where you're going to go. I think research is part of preparation. So understanding an organization's vision, mission, if there's a recent annual report, if they post about their values, great. Maybe you can make some direct connections there. Ultimate would be connecting with someone in the organization and talking to them, I think, a little bit about their experience. That may or may not always be possible, but I think any and all things in that research and preparation piece are really important. And practice. And I think practice with your coaches, take advantage of that, practice with friends and family, open up a Zoom, record yourself and watch it back, right? Do all those sorts of things. Maybe do some box breathing or something to relax yourself before you go into the interview because it is stressful. It can sometimes be a bit stressful as an interviewer too, right? You can feel a little bit of that as well, a little bit nervous. But I think people expect that, and for the most part, people are going to be really empathetic with that. And I would just say too, when you, especially if you have the opportunity to walk in person, if you don't, then virtually, make sure you introduce yourself, make sure you connect with each person on the call or with each person in the room. Walk up to them, shake a hand if you can. Just kind of depends. I think so many interviews are virtual now. It's kind of changed the game a little bit.
And I just want to offer up that before I interviewed with both of you in person, I had a coffee chat, if you will, with both of you. And so I had a bit of a sense of what you were looking for, of who you were as people, as how you showed up, and it truly supported my own preparation. And so it's a really key piece that I think can often be missed if you have the opportunity to know who you're interviewing with. But like Paul said, we probably could do two parts to this, but I think it's time for a lightning round. You ready?
Okay.
All right, three quick questions, three gut answers. What part of your career story has given you the biggest boost?
I think stepping out of my comfort zone and taking on projects that weren't sort of in the confines of my position description, which might make me sound rogue, but I don't quite mean it that way. But I would say stepping out of my comfort zone and kind of taking advantage of opportunities that presented themselves.
What do you wish you'd learned sooner?
There is no right or wrong official noble set of careers. Trust the process, learn about yourself. It's a winding road, right? I wish I'd learned that a little bit earlier. I was very worried about that early in my career.
And service is really important to Paul and I. So we're always curious to hear how it's going to show up for you in the coming week.
Yeah, for me, I'm actually heading on vacation, so I might have a little bit of a different take on this. I think part of showing up for others is also making sure we're taking care of ourselves and self-care. And so I think for myself, it's going to be a time to relax and recharge with my family. And so hopefully part of bringing myself, my best self to working with others is taking that time to take care of myself.
I love that framing. Cool. Paul, random question.
This was pretty easy for me. Amber and I share a passion for the world of soccer or football. We may not like it very much, but definitely people in our immediate circle do like it quite a bit. So, Amber, as a soccer parent, what is the best thing about being a soccer parent and the worst thing about being a soccer parent?
Ooh, love it. Okay. Best thing, I never played on a team sport. I always participated in individual sports growing up. And honestly, I think just watching my child engage with the team is something I just really, really enjoy observing. And I've just seen how much benefit it's had for him. Thing that I like least, I mean, it's kind of funny. Not that I have a lot of plans on a Saturday night as it stands, but our current soccer schedule has us going to a soccer game every Saturday night. So I think the organizers are quite aware that maybe parents don't have a lot of plans on Saturday nights, but sometimes it would be nice to have one to ourselves.
Oh man, I would hear that's a theme I hear from many parents is just how it sort of fills up the schedule. Paul
Yeah.
talks about that a lot too. So, and when people wonder how I get so much done or do other things, I have to remind everyone I don't have kids. So my schedule's a little different. Amber, thank you so much. We've been waiting to have you on to find the right topic to have you give and offer your expertise, and that's exactly what you did. We could keep talking. I think there's a lot of interesting information to understand on how three different people interviewed differently. There are commonalities among the three of us, but we all show up differently. We look for different things, we make different assumptions. And so, thank you for sharing your viewpoints, your tips and tricks. The audience that you have supported is just better for it, for having you support them along the way. And we are better for having you on our team and empowering us and really truly being, you are solidly our champions. And we know that and we appreciate it, but you are solidly champion for students across the board. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. I think this is such an excellent podcast, such excellent information that you get to students, and it's an absolute pleasure to be on. I think you really touched on something there too, where again, these are my perspectives on interviewing, but I think there's lots out there. So I think students kind of have to figure out what fits for them best, what advice fits for them.
And we'll just end on another great piece of advice. Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
So we could have done a whole nother episode, but let's see if we can highlight some really great key takeaways because I think the whole thing was a takeaway. But for me, there was a sentence that she said that first impressions happen really quickly, and they do. And we know it, but I don't think we realize quite how much it's impacting the rest of the interview within, the 5-10 seconds with which you meet someone first off. And while we may know that, do you actually know what your first impression is? Have you gotten feedback? Do you listen to others? Do you have people in your circle that can give you trusted information on how you show up? And are you willing to receive that to be able to understand if there's areas of improvement? It sets a tone and it is a big part of what we make decisions on, whether we like it or not. So first impressions, figure them out.
I really love that. Think about even just a person showing up 5 minutes late to an interview or something, panicking and rushing in. The first impression's not great, right? So, yeah, really good. When I think about what I left with this conversation, it's literally all 40 minutes or however long we talked about. But the two things that stand out to me, culture and fit, I cannot emphasize enough how important this is. This is a make it or break it in a job interview. You need to understand how you fit into the team. You need to ask questions. You need to kind of observe, and that's all I can say about that. And then I'll relate this back to last week. I'm taking two key takeaways, but I think last week we talked about storytelling, and she told the amazing story about the person that came in with the flower, and gosh, stories just are stinking amazing. Stories are awesome. So.
And so we have a week off coming up. In our world, it's reading week. So yeah, we will not be here next week. But the week after that, we're going to chat a bit about AI. Using AI in the whole process of career management is becoming quite a thing. So we'll talk about that a bit. Awesome. See you next week. Nope, not next week. See you in 2 weeks. Thanks for tuning in to the Career Boosters podcast. We hope you had a blast. Yeah, we know that's corny. Catch you next time, and remember to subscribe wherever you enjoy podcasts.